Hey, welcome to Spectral Echoes, a collection of Reddit stories as told by people high as a kite. But it's Reddit, who knows, right? If you like the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, so you don't miss out on these awesome horror stories. Now, let's get started.
Unexplained repeating feelings. At first, it's just a fleeting feeling. But when it happens enough times, you start to wonder if something is really there. The 1147 drawer.
I'm not entirely sure what I truly experienced, but even though I've moved elsewhere and months have passed, every time I see the clock strike exactly 11:47, I feel a very specific unease, as if something is there, just an old drawer, opening every night at the same time. That's all. Yet I still can't forget that feeling. I moved out to live alone late that year, after my old roommate moved back home. I decided not to find a new one, as I actually wanted to try living alone. The small apartment I rented wasn't particularly special. One bedroom, a small kitchen, faded cream walls, and old but functional furniture. I didn't think much of it, just needed a quiet and comfortable enough place to come home to after work. The apartment was on the second floor of an old building, with a long, narrow hallway, and a rattling fan noise in the evenings. Everything was quite peaceful, even a bit lonely, but I was used to that. I moved in on an early autumn day. The weather was cool, nothing unusual. The first week passed quite smoothly, until I noticed a small habit of this apartment, or more accurately, of the old drawer under the sink. It was a faded, old, slightly loose wooden drawer, sitting low to the floor, right beneath the kitchen sink. I hardly ever touched it because it was stuck, very difficult to pull out, and I had no reason to use anyway. I kept dishes on the upper shelf, dry goods and spices next to it. That bottom drawer was almost forgotten, until one night, when I was cooking and heard a very soft clink sound. I turned around and saw the drawer slightly ajar, about half a centimeter, just enough to see the faded handle gleaming in the kitchen light. I thought it was because I was standing too close, or maybe the floor was uneven and vibrated slightly, making it slide open. I pushed it back in and forgot about it. But just a few days later, late one evening, as I was reading in the living room, the sound came again, right as I turned to a new page. A clink, small but distinct. I looked up, and just like before, that drawer was ajar. This time, I clearly hadn't done anything to make it open. I walked into the kitchen, closed it gently, then stood still listening. Nothing unusual. I went back to my chair, but an inexplicable unease lingered. I started paying more attention, and then I realized what chilled me wasn't the sound of the drawer, but the timing of its appearance. Every time, it was exactly 11:47 p.m., not a minute off. At first, I thought I was imagining things, so I tried checking by setting an alarm for that exact time to see if it coincided, and it did, almost perfectly. Every night, at that precise moment, no matter what I was doing, that clink would sound like a gentle reminder. I tried setting up my phone to record the drawer overnight. The next morning, when I checked, I only heard the sound of it opening, but didn't see any movement. The camera didn't catch anything. Nothing moved, no mice, no wind, just a clink and the image of the drawer slightly ajar. I tried taping it shut, tried wedging it into it, tried blocking it with books, all in vain. At that time, the opening sound still echoed. Even if the drawer wasn't pulled out anymore, I still heard that clink very clearly, like a fixed sound in the air. I told this story to a friend. They laughed and said I must have been dreaming and opened it myself in a half-asleep state, or maybe it was a psychological reflex, getting used to the sound at a fixed time and then creating a hallucination. I wanted to believe that too, but then other things started to happen. One night, as I had just turned off the lights and was getting ready for bed, lying in my room, I heard a very soft sound, a small metallic clink. I got up, went to the kitchen, and saw a wooden spoon on the counter. The spoon I was certain I had washed and put away in the cupboard last night. I looked into the cupboard, and indeed, the spoon tray was missing one. No signs of disarray. The cupboard door was still closed. I couldn't explain why the spoon was on the counter, neatly placed as if someone had just used it and left it there. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't sleepwalking. I started to feel scared, not because of obvious things, but because everything that happened was so small, so subtle, yet full of intent. Nothing big, nothing terrifying. But it made me feel like I was living with something trying to follow an old habit, or wanted me to repeat that habit for it. I lived like that for a few more weeks. Half anxious, half helpless. Then, when I decided to move house for work, I cleaned everything up. And when I removed that drawer from the kitchen to clean and throw it away, I discovered a very thin indentation at the bottom of the drawer, a faint circular mark, as if something had been placed there perfectly for a long time. I touched it. The wood felt softer, slightly damp. Nothing unusual, nothing hidden underneath. But I just had a feeling it was part of a sequence of actions I didn't understand. That drawer had been used at a fixed time for something, for someone, and now I had inadvertently continued it. I left that apartment not long after. Didn't say anything to the landlord. My new apartment was quieter. No old drawer, no clink at night. But 2 weeks later, one night I was thirsty, so I got up to go to the kitchen. I looked at the kitchen clock. Exactly 11:47. Nothing strange, no sounds. But I stood still for a long time, then went back to my bedroom without getting water. I had a feeling I had forgotten to close something. In the following weeks, sometimes, in the midst of thoughts during work hours, I'd suddenly look at the clock and see 11:47. Not night, but noon. Not intentionally, but my eyes unconsciously scanning. And I'd again feel like I had missed something. Then it started repeating, no longer the clink, but the feeling. That feeling seeped into unrelated moments too. Like the time I was waiting for the elevator at work. The floor indicator stopped at number 11 randomly, but then the hand on my watch showed exactly 11:47. I stepped into the elevator with a strange feeling in my heart, as if I was continuing some invisible habit from another place at another time without even knowing it. And then one day, as I was cleaning the kitchen of my new apartment, I discovered a small drawer right under the microwave, something I had never opened since moving in. For some reason that day, I suddenly bent down and tried to pull it. The drawer wasn't stuck, but it was stiff. When it opened, inside there was only a plastic jar lid, which rolled exactly one full rotation, and then stopped, making a very faint clink. I closed it immediately, not out of fear, but because of a familiar, suffocating feeling. I still don't know what happened. I don't know if anything truly exists, but I know that every time I see the clock show 11:47, day or night, I will always pause for a few seconds. Just a few seconds, to make sure I haven't forgotten something or someone. Just an old drawer, a fixed time, a repeated habit that still remains in my mind to this day.
The out-of-sync reflection.
I've heard a lot about fleeting hallucinations, those strange moments when a human brain, tired, sleep-deprived, or under great pressure, conjures up something that isn't there just to bridge the gap between perception and response. Well, I'm about to recount. However, I find myself at a loss to classify. Was it a waking dream, a strange misdirection of my senses, or simply a genuine optical illusion? Whatever its true nature, the experience has stuck with me stubbornly, a persistent, insidious unease that has lasted long enough to fundamentally alter the way I perceive every mirror I encounter, not just the one confined to the elevator. My home is nestled within an old apartment building, a structure that has seen several decades of use. Its walls bear the telltale signs of time, with paint flaking and peeling in various places. The elevator, a cramped contraption barely large enough for two individuals, consistently emits an unsettling clanking sound as it laboriously ascends and descends between floors. At its rear, a sizable mirror, perpetually hazy and tinged with yellow, is marred by countless small scratches, rendering it blurry with prolonged observation. I had, for years, unconsciously made a habit of glancing into this mirror each morning before heading to work and every evening upon my late return from studies. I never gave it much thought, not until one particular night, nearing midnight, as I was returning home from a group study session. The elevator, to my mild surprise, was empty. I stepped inside, and as was my routine, leaned my back gently against the mirror, my head tilted slightly upwards, my eyes wearily tracking the illuminated floor numbers as they flickered on the digital display. The ceiling light within the elevator casts a subtle, wavering glow. There's an undeniable sensation of profound stillness in an elevator late at night, a quietness that feels somehow more pronounced than during the day. I distinctly recall blinking. It was, by all accounts, just a normal, everyday blink. But in that infinitesimally brief moment, I perceived my reflection in the mirror blink a beat slower than I did. It was incredibly subtle, almost imperceptible. Yet, I am absolutely certain of what I saw. The sensation that coursed through me at that instant was akin to stumbling when you misjudge a step on a staircase. It lasts for only a fleeting second, but it sends a jolt of tension through your entire body. I froze, my gaze fixed on the mirror for an extended moment. Then, with a tentative gesture, I raised my hand and gave a slight wave, turned my face, and tilted my head to inspect various angles. Nothing out of the ordinary. I stepped out of the elevator, attempting to reassure myself that my eyes were simply tired, or perhaps my mind was under too much strain, leading to a momentary hallucination. At the time, I was heavily engrossed in a thesis project, frequently enduring very little sleep. So any anomalous sensations were conveniently attributed to sheer exhaustion. However, the unsettling truth was that feeling refused to dissipate, and it transcended mere blinking. Approximately a few days later, I found myself stepping into the elevator alone once more. This time, nothing overtly strange occurred. I even made a conscious effort not to look into the mirror. But in one fleeting instant, as I quickly glanced across the mirror while the elevator doors were slowly closing, I had a distinct impression that the figure in the mirror smiled very faintly. It was a subtle, pursed-lipped smile, not clearly defined, yet it was undeniably not my own. I wasn't smiling at that moment. In fact, I was frowning, still vexed by a lingering issue from class. But that reflection, I would stake my life on it, seemed to be smiling for precisely a fraction of a second. Then it vanished, and everything reverted to normal. I dared not recount this incident to anyone. I couldn't even bring myself to believe it. Instead, I quietly adjusted my habits. From that day forward, I consistently positioned myself to face the elevator doors. Each time I stepped inside, my eyes remained glued to the digital display. A cold sensation often crept up my spine, but I resolutely refused to turn around. Sometimes I purposefully avoided the mirror altogether, driven by an unsettling fear that if I scrutinized it too closely, I might witness something that was never meant to be seen. I knew, deep down, that I might be experiencing some form of disorientation. Perhaps it was sleep deprivation, stress, or simply my mind playing an elaborate trick on me. Yet, the sensation persisted. On one occasion, as I was exiting the elevator, my hand unconsciously snapped my head around, as if attempting to catch something in the act. Nothing, just myself or my reflection, standing perfectly straight, the overhead light casting a dull, faint glow. But from that moment on, I found myself doing this more frequently. I couldn't explain why. It was simply something I felt compelled to do. It was as if an inexplicable urge within me constantly compelled me to look back, to catch a quick glimpse and then turn away. I once attempted to rationalize it. Perhaps my brain processed visual information with a slight delay. Perhaps it was the aged mirror, the poor lighting, or simply I strained. I tried taking photos, attempted to record videos, and on one particular day, even used my phone's camera to look behind me as I entered the elevator. Every single test yielded normal results, but the feeling remained. It didn't originate from my eyesight, but from somewhere far deeper, as if a gaze was patiently awaiting me. And only when I averted my eyes was it permitted to do something different. Just recently, one evening, I made a conscious decision not to look back again. I reasoned that if I simply ceased reacting, the feeling would eventually dissipate on its own. I walked straight, entered the elevator, stood still, didn't turn my head, didn't look in the mirror, did absolutely nothing. But just as the elevator doors were poised to close, in that very last fraction of a second, I stole a glance, just a faint, quick peek, and I saw myself in the mirror, bowing its head, very subtly, but I, in reality, was standing perfectly straight. Since that day, whenever I ride the elevator alone, I continue to face the door, but my heart invariably beats a little faster. Or, perhaps more terrifyingly, it reflects perfectly. It's just a little bit slow back in the city. I've often wondered if I truly saw someone, or if it was just a series of hallucinations caused by stress and the isolated environment. But no explanation can account for those eyes. That wasn't something I imagined, not the vagueness of a shadow. It was a real gaze, and it carried an emotion that cannot be named. Perhaps it was a person. Perhaps it wasn't. And the scariest thing isn't its appearance, but the feeling that it never truly left. That trip changed me a lot. From loving the forest, loving isolation, loving absolute quiet, I started to look at nature with a different perspective. Nature can be gentle, but it can also hide things not meant for humans. There are places, there are beings, there are gazes that one should not touch. And I know that, perhaps for the rest of my life, I will never forget those deep, soulless black eyes, the thing that instilled in me a haunting that no words of comfort can erase.
The breathing sound near dawn.
Perhaps many people, like me, have had moments where they thought they heard something, then chuckled weakly, shook their heads, and told themselves they were too tired, too stressed, too mentally muddled to have imagined such nonsense. And honestly, I wouldn't blame anyone for thinking that. Because even now, to this very day, I have never dared to be certain whether what I experienced was real, or merely a product of my heightened sensitivity during a period of intense stress. When I was studying for my university entrance exams, I didn't have many options for a quiet study spot at home. My room on the second floor was constantly subject to people passing by, the TV blaring late into the night, and even the neighbor's dog barking whenever someone walked past the gate. Eventually, I decided to move downstairs to the ground floor to what was once a storage room for old belongings. It had been partially cleared out to serve as a place to keep motorcycles and various odds and ends. That room wasn't spacious, lacked windows, and carried a faint, damp smell, yet it was remarkably quiet. The cement walls were thick, the wooden door sealed tight, and sounds were almost entirely cut off from the outside. For me, it was the ideal place to concentrate on my studies. I brought down a folding table, an old plastic chair, a desk lamp, and my laptop. I would then stay holed up there almost every night, from around 10 p.m. until 3 or 4 a.m. The first week passed quite smoothly. I studied, solved practice problems, drank water, and went upstairs a few times for bathroom breaks, but overall, I felt comfortable. Towards the end of the second week, as my study schedule entered its peak phase, I spent longer hours there. Some nights, I wouldn't go to bed until 5 a.m., and it was from that point that I began to hear a strange sound. It wasn't a clattering noise, nor the buzzing of insects or an electrical hum. Instead, it was a very soft, very steady sound, like breathing. Initially, I thought it was noise echoing from the street or wind whistling through a crack in the door. But the longer I sat, the more I concentrated, the more certain I became that it was the regular sound of breathing, like someone sleeping right beside me. A warm breath, not too strong, not panting, just genuinely someone else breathing with me. I tried turning off everything. My laptop, the lamp, even my mini fan. Then I sat in silence, holding my breath, listening intently. And the sound persisted. At that moment, I remained motionless for nearly 10 minutes, doing nothing but attempting to pinpoint the source of the sound. It emanated from the left corner of the room, where a wooden chair was pushed against the wall. This chair used to be for helmets, but I had cleared it to make space. Now it was empty, and I could swear the breathing sound came directly from that very spot. I stood up, turned on the main light, and walked closer to the chair. Nothing. I touched the chair back, felt under the seat, looked around. Everything was perfectly normal. No mice, no objects that could create such a sound. I even took out my phone to record a video, but it only captured general ambient noise, not the distinct sound of breathing. I went upstairs, slept soundly until noon the next day. When I woke up, I told myself that my mind was probably just overstressed, or that I was unconsciously hearing my own breathing and imagining everything. But I still returned to that room the following night, and the night after that. I didn't want to abandon my late-night study routine just because of something I didn't understand. However, the phenomenon didn't cease. The deeper into the night it got, the clearer the sound became. I tried changing my study hours, sometimes going down at 11 p.m., sometimes not starting until nearly 5 a.m. But no matter the time slot, as long as I studied past 2 a.m., that sound would reappear. And it was always in the same place, that corner with the wooden chair. The only difference was it wasn't fixed anymore. A few times later, I discovered the breathing sound coming from right under the stairs or behind the back door leading to the backyard, a door I never opened at night. I began to feel uneasy. Not a terrifying kind of fear, but a vague, nameless sensation, as if someone was sharing the space with me. Some nights, while typing an essay, I had a distinct feeling that someone was standing behind me. I would turn around quickly, and of course, there was nothing. But the next night, when I bent down to pick up a dropped pen, I clearly heard the breathing sound coming from above, as if someone was leaning over, looking down at me from behind the chair. I didn't turn around immediately. Instead, I stood straight up, tried to keep my breathing steady, and walked out of the room. The next day, I spoke with my father. He didn't laugh, nor did he react strongly. He simply said, concisely, "It's probably just an old ventilation pipe. Don't worry about it, just focus on your studies." I didn't say anything more, but I wasn't convinced. I knew the sound of machinery, the sound of the air conditioner, the refrigerator, the old fan. This sound was different. It was softer, rhythmic, with pauses, even varying in length as if according to a mood. And what truly unnerved me was when I once tried to count the rhythm of that breathing, only to find that it perfectly matched my own breathing, just slightly delayed, like a shadow mimicking me. I decided not to study on the ground floor anymore. Despite my demanding study schedule, I moved upstairs, studying in the living room, trying to endure the louder ambient noise and the TV sounds from the adjacent room. Before leaving the ground floor, I gathered some remaining items. As I pulled out a drawer in the cabinet next to the wooden chair, one I had almost never opened, I found an old, damp, slightly discolored cloth face mask inside, as if it had just been used. I froze for a moment. I never kept face masks here, and certainly no one else had access to this room besides me. I took the mask, put it in a trash bag, and immediately disposed of it outside. But from that day on, every morning I would have a slight cough. No fever, no sickness, no runny nose. Just a dry cough every morning as I walked down the stairs to the ground floor. I took medication, went to the doctor, who said there was nothing wrong, possibly a mild allergy or the weather. But I knew that cough wasn't caused by the air. It was a kind of reaction, as if my throat was recalling the sound it had heard too many times. Even though I no longer studied on the ground floor, I still had to pass through it every day. Every time I walked down the stairs in the morning, I felt a slight catch in my throat, and on rainy nights, when the house was at its quietest, I had the sensation that the sound was still there. Not distinct, but faintly present somewhere in the echoes from downstairs, a soft, steady breath, as if someone had never truly left.
The repeating footsteps.
I never intended to share this story, because truthfully, I'm still not certain if I imagined it, or if something truly happened. Every time I recall it, I find myself questioning whether it was just overthinking, or perhaps living alone for too long, walking home late too often, causing my mind to weave together things that don't exist. But if anyone else has experienced a similar feeling, perhaps they'll understand why I can't entirely dismiss this. I never intended to share this story, because truthfully, I'm still not certain if I imagined it, or if something truly happened. Every time I recall it, I find myself questioning whether it was just overthinking, or perhaps living alone for too long, walking home late too often, causing my mind to weave together things that don't exist. But if anyone else has experienced a similar feeling, perhaps they'll understand why I can't entirely dismiss this. I tried to shake off the feeling and continued walking. But just a few minutes later, I heard a very faint sound, like footsteps. It wasn't distinct, just like shoes touching the pavement far away, but its rhythm almost perfectly matched my own steps. I stopped again, and this time, the footsteps behind me also ceased. I spun around quickly, but saw no one. I tried walking slower, then faster, and the sensation that someone was mimicking my every movement began to make me uneasy. I told my best friend about it. They just laughed and told me I was overthinking, that the sound might be echoing from nearby buildings, or from a night security guard somewhere. I wanted to believe that too. But on subsequent occasions, every time I walked home late, those footsteps always reappeared. I wore headphones, played loud music, but still heard them. I changed music genres, used different headphones, but nothing changed. I started counting my steps, intentionally taking odd-numbered steps or stepping decisively, but the footsteps behind me still kept pace, maintaining a rhythm with me like an invisible shadow. One night, I decided to take a different route, detouring through a small, tiled alleyway with many sharp turns. I thought if the footsteps were real, I would easily detect them. And indeed, as I turned into the alley, the footsteps followed. I stopped abruptly. After a second of silence, I heard a very faint misstep, like someone stumbling because they couldn't stop in time with me. My heart pounded. I didn't turn around, just bowed my head, quickened my pace, and then ran at full speed when the alley began to get dark. When I got home, I quickly locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat panting on the sofa. After that night, I always carried a flashlight, always looked behind me when walking, and I began to feel uneasy even when I was at home. Then, another night, as I lay waiting for sleep, I heard footsteps in the dormitory building. The steps were clear, moving very slowly, coming up from the floor below. The old wooden floorboards made a very distinct echoing sound. I was on the second floor, and the steps stopped right outside my room door. I heard no knock, no human voice, only a prolonged silence. I didn't dare go near the door, just sat up and looked at the clock, nearly 2 a.m. A moment later, when there was no more sound, I peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, dimly lit by a yellow light, not a soul in sight. I tried to change my work hours, requested to switch to the morning shift, hoping I was just too tired. But a few days later, while at home in the late afternoon, I again heard footsteps in the hallway. That feeling returned, and this time I don't know if I was imagining it, but I didn't want to open the door to check anymore. I started suffering from insomnia. I used noise-canceling headphones, played ambient music to sleep, but it didn't help much. I felt like something was always following me home. It wasn't a person, but it wasn't nothing either. I couldn't describe what it was. I only knew that no matter which way I walked home from work, or at what hour, at some point, I would hear the sound of footsteps blending with my own, sometimes a beat faster, sometimes half a second slower, as if trying to adjust to my rhythm. I borrowed a bicycle for work to avoid walking, but even while cycling, I still felt as if there was a gaze behind me. Not clear, but still present. I went to the doctor. They diagnosed me with possible stress and mild paranoia due to prolonged sleep deprivation. I also thought that might be the case, so I requested leave and went back to my hometown for a few weeks to recuperate. Strangely, when I was home, I no longer heard anything. No more footsteps, no more feeling of being watched. I started to feel more at ease, slept more deeply, and sometimes even laughed at myself for having imagined too much. But then, one morning, while walking to the village market, I crossed a small wooden bridge. As I stepped onto the third plank, I heard a faint creak right behind me. I froze. The small bridge was only wide enough for one person at a time. There was no way anyone could have stepped onto it without me seeing them. I turned around. No one was there. But the sound of the wood creaking wasn't caused by the wind, and I was certain I hadn't caused it. I didn't tell anyone else. I returned to the city, continued my work, lived normally. But from then on, every time I walked, I would often stop in the middle of the road just to make sure there were no other footsteps behind me. And one day, standing in the elevator, I saw in the mirror reflection behind me a faint human figure, lifting its foot at the same time as me. I turned around. The elevator was empty. I didn't recount that incident to anyone. And I'm not even sure what I truly saw, whether it was just a flickering light, or due to tired eyes. But from then on, I stopped trying to prove that something was following me. Because I think, perhaps it was all just my overthinking, my walking home late for too long, living alone for too long, giving rise to those inexplicable repeating sensations.
If you like the video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on these awesome horror stories.